The boy who had sacrificed everything for his family was now alone, facing a bleak future, punished for a crime he didn't commit. This story centers around a young boy named Ubong. 17 years old, talented and high-spirited, but born into a family torn apart by domestic violence. His mother often drank to escape the pain, while his father's temper ruled the household. Arguments between them could last for weeks, leaving Ubong and his siblings to fend for themselves. Ubong returned home from school, finding his younger siblings huddled together. The empty cupboards mirrored their hungry eyes. He knelt down and asked softly, "Have you guys eaten this evening?" His siblings shook their heads, too used to the routine to cry anymore. The shouting match between their parents in the next room echoed through the tin walls, drowning out their stomachs' grumbles. Realizing the severity of the situation, Ubong made a tough decision. He started working extra hours at a local restaurant after school. His small earnings went straight to buying food for his siblings, and whatever was left over, he brought home. One evening, as he handed out some leftover food from the restaurant to his siblings, he looked at his worn school books with a heavy heart. The decision gnawed at him, but he knew he couldn't continue his studies while his siblings starved. The next morning, while serving breakfast at the restaurant, the town librarian, Mrs. Ufon, noticed him. She was the kind woman known for her gentle ways and deep understanding. She had often seen Ubong at the library, borrowing books with a hunger for knowledge. "Hey, why aren't you in school at this time?" Mrs. Ufong asked with concern while she was picking up an order for her boss. Ubong's face fell. "I had to, for my brothers," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Ufon, sensing the pain in his voice, wisely changed the subject. "Oh, this food must be yummy. I might come to order mine too," she said with a bright smile, hoping to lift his spirits. And it did work. "Ma'am, Chef Ildrak's wife gave birth today, so he's in a super mood. And you know what they say about chefs and their moods." Ubong responded, a hint of cheer returning to his voice. Mrs. Ufon laughed. "That's so right. I better go congratulate him. God is super faithful." Oh. She paused before leaving. "By the way, Ubong, I will compile some books for you. Education shouldn't be confined to the walls of school, but in studious learning." Ma'am, thank you so much, ma'am. I will be delighted to come by this evening," Ubong said, gratitude clear in his voice. Later that evening, Ubong stood at the back of the restaurant, packing up the leftover food in the kitchen. It had become a daily routine, taking the unfinished portions that customers left behind, wrapping them carefully and bringing them home to his hungry siblings. It wasn't much, but it helped. As Ubong finished packing the food, Mr. Umom, one of the restaurant managers, watched from a distance. He had always been envious of the way Ubong connected with the customers, especially the VIPs. The tips they gave Ubong, the praises they heaped on him, it all made Mr. Imom feel slighted. "Let's see how long you will keep this up," Mr. Imom muttered under his breath, an idea forming in his mind. That evening, when Ubong wasn't looking, Mr. Imom switched the leftover food packs with new ones, carefully sealed and wrapped. When Ubong came to collect them, he didn't notice the difference. He was too focused on getting home quickly to his siblings. The next day, Mr. Imom approached the restaurant management. "I've noticed something concerning..." He began feigning concern. Ubong has been taking food from the restaurant, new packs that should be sold to customers. The heads of the restaurant were shocked. Ubong had always had a clean record, but the evidence as presented by Mr. Imom was too much to ignore. They called Ubong into the office. Ubong, we've received reports that you've been taking new food packs. Do you have anything to say for yourself? One of the managers asked sternly. Ubong was taken aback. No, sir. I've only ever taken the leftovers, like I was allowed to. We found new packs among the leftovers you took last night. Another manager chipped in, showing him the wrapped food packs. Ubong's heart sank. He didn't know how the new packs got there, but he realized he had no proof of his innocence. Despite his previous good record, the management decided to let him go with just a warning, deducting his salary to cover the cost of the food. Mr. Imom watched from the doorway, his lips curling into a satisfied smirk. But this wasn't enough. He wanted Ubong out for good. A week later, one of the restaurant's regular VIPs arrived with his children. They adored Ubong, and the VIP had even considered sponsoring Ubong's education. Mr. Imom had another plan. When the VIP's family left the restaurant, Mr. Imom snuck into the children's section and took an expensive custom-made watch that belonged to one of the kids. He discreetly planted it in Ubong's backpack in the workers' cabinet, ensuring it would be found. Later that day, the VIP returned in a panic, realizing the watch was missing. The restaurant was searched, and when the watch was found, it was found in Ubong's backpack. Everyone was shocked. The VIP's face fell as he looked at Ubong. I wish you had told me you needed money, Ubong. I would have gladly given it to you. Not this. His voice was heavy with disappointment. Ubong felt like the world had collapsed around him. I didn't do it. I didn't do it, he cried out as the police dragged him to their van. Tears streaming down his face. He looked at the VIP, desperately trying to explain. But the look of betrayal in the man's eyes cut deeper than the loss of his freedom. Mr. Imam watched from a distance, satisfied with how things had turned out. For him, it was a job well done. The courtroom was filled with a sober air as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. Ubong stood in the dock, his head hung low, eyes filled with despair. He had hoped, against all odds, that someone would come forward to defend him. But the courtroom was clearly empty. Neither his parents nor his siblings were there. No one was. Mr. Emem, the VIP, who had once been so fond of Ubong, sat in the front row, his face etched with sadness. He had never wanted it to come to this, but the evidence seemed undeniable. The watch had been found in Ubong's backpack, and that fact weighed heavily on the judge's decision. Ubong, the judge's voice broke the silence. Though your record has been clean up until now, the evidence against you is compelling. Thefts, especially of such a valuable item, cannot go unpunished. Mr. Emem lowered his head, his heart heavy. He had truly believed in Ubong's potential, but now all he felt was sorrow. The judge continued, I hereby sentence you to 6 months in juvenile detention. His gavel hit the decks, sealing Ubong's fate. Tears welled up in Ubong's eyes. He had wanted to scream that he was innocent, but the words caught in his throat. The thought of not seeing his siblings for so long, of them not knowing what had happened to him was unbearable. The room felt cold, distant, a world away from the warmth he had once known. As he was led away in handcuffs, Ubong took one last look at Mr. MM, hoping for a glimmer of belief in his innocence. But all he saw was disappointment and sadness, and it crushed him even further. The doors closed behind him, and with them any hope Ubong had left. The boy who had sacrificed everything for his family was now alone, facing a bleak future, punished for a crime he didn't commit. As Ubong was escorted into the juvenile detention center, a cold shiver ran down his spine. The iron gate clanged shut behind him, sealing his fate. He was in a new world now, one where innocence was a foreign concept and survival was the only language spoken. The echo of his footsteps on the concrete floor was drowned out by the distant noise of inmates' voices, the clanging of metal, and the occasional barked orders from the guards. The routine was strict. Morning started at 5:30 a.m. with the blaring of a siren that jolted Ubong awake from his restless sleep. His thin mattress offered little comfort, and the grey windowless cell felt like a tomb. Breakfast was served at 6 a.m. Bland porridge and a piece of bread that barely filled his growing hunger. He lined up with other inmates, all wearing the same drab uniforms, their eyes either blank or filled with bitterness. The days were a series of monotonous tasks: cleaning, working in the prison yard, and attending mandatory classes. Ubong found the classes to be the only solace, a faint echo of the education he had sacrificed for his siblings. But even that comfort was marred by the constant presence of other inmates, many of whom carried an air of hardened defiance. There was one particular inmate who took a special interest on Ubong. His name was Kelly, a boy just a year older, but his eyes had seen much more. Kelly was tough, with a reputation of getting what he wanted through intimidation. From day one, he singled Ubong out, taunting him during meals, shoving him in the yard, and stealing what little Ubong had. "You think you're better than us because you are new?" Kelly sneered one day, his face inches from Ubong's. "This isn't your world, boy." Ubong tried to keep his head down to avoid confrontation, but it was clear that Kelly had no intention of letting him be. As the weeks dragged on, Ubong felt his hope dwindling. He counted down the days until 6-month sentence would be up, but the weight of prison life was crushing his spirit. One afternoon, while they were supposed to be walking in the yard, Kenny pushed Ubong too far. After days of pent-up frustration, Ubong snapped. Kelly had knocked Ubong's trail of food to the ground, laughing cruelly. Something in Ubong broke. Years of pain, of sacrifice and injustice boiled over. Without thinking, Ubong swung his fist, landing a punch squarely on Kelly's jaw. The yard went silent as Kelly stumbled back, shocked. But Ubong's victory was short-lived. Kenny recovered quickly, and with a dark look in his eyes, he lunged at Ubong. The guards broke up the fight before it could escalate, but the damage was done. Later that night, Ubong lay in his bunk, nursing the bruises from the fight. He knew he had made a mistake, one that could cost him dearly. As if on cue, the door to his cell creaked open. Kenny and his gang slipped inside, their faces twisted with malicious intent. "You thought you could get away with that?" Kenny hissed, grabbing Ubong by the collar. They beat him until he was barely unconscious, leaving him a broken hip on the floor. The next morning, the guards found Ubong battered and bruised, unable to stand. Instead of getting sympathy, he was met with accusations. Kenny had concocted a story claiming Ubong had attacked him and his friends in a premeditated attack. With no witnesses to back him up, Ubong's story was dismissed. The judge, already weary from the backlog of cases, saw Ubong as just another lost cause. He barely listened to Ubong's plea of innocence before handing down a new sentence: 5 years in prison for aggravated assault. Hello everyone, my name is Ugochi. Welcome to Ugochi TV, your home of new age storytelling. Please tap on the subscribe button, like and share. It's entirely free. Thank you. Now back to the video. Ubong felt his world collapsed. The 6 months he had counted down had turned into an eternity, and his hope was extinguished. The next few months in prison was a blur of pain and hopelessness. Ubong learned quickly to keep to himself. The once bright, high-spirited boy who had worked so hard to provide for his siblings was gone, replaced by a hollow shell of his former self. He no longer looked forward to anything. Each day was just another day to survive. The inmates had an hierarchy, and after his altercation with Kenny, Ubong was marked as an easy target. He was constantly harassed, forced into labor, and deprived of even the meager comfort the prison offered. The guards turned a blind eye, seeing him as just another troublemaker. Ubong's thoughts often drifted to his siblings. He wondered if they were okay, if they knew where he was, or if they missed him. He knew deep down that they were likely struggling without him, just as he was without them. Ubong lay on his bed, his mind bleak as always. He stared blankly at the cell ceiling. His bunkmate has just been taken to solitary confinement for instigating a deadly fight against a prison guard who had whipped him days back. Ubong, still in his thoughts, sprung up as his cell gates clanked open. He defensively stood up as though to fight anyone that wanted to launch at him. He suddenly quieted down his stance as he saw a new figure he hadn't seen before in the prison, being pushed into his cell by 2 prison guards. His new cellmate was Mustapha, a petite young man that could easily pass for an underage. Ubong got curious to actually hear about Mustapha's story. "What is such a small boy doing here?" he asked. Knowing how terrible the prison walls were, Ubong unconsciously wore a big brother pants to cater for Mustapha. He taught him how to avoid the big bullies, how to ensure he wasn't on anyone's black book, especially that of the prison guards. They would ask an inmate to deal with you when they know they can't touch you illegally. Avoid getting into their troubles, Ubong said one day to Mustapha as they were doing their laundry. Mustapha thanked Ubong and asked him why he was always standing up for him. "I was wrongly accused of something I didn't do," Ubong began. "I was given just 6 months sentence. Then it felt like a long time to be. Now," Ubong shrugs his shoulder, 5 whole years. For a beatdown that I was the victim. His weary eyes hold sad tears. Mustapha, still wondering why Ubong had been watchful over him, waiting to know why. "Seeing you," Ubong replied, "your age, your quiet demeanor reminded me of my first days here. So I felt to help out, as I would have loved to be helped when I first got here. Ubong replied him wholeheartedly. "Get back to work, you lazy criminals." One prison guard backed out to them. "My name is Mustapha. I am 22 years old." Mustapha introducing himself to Ubong as they lay on their thin foams for mattresses. "I joined a robbery crew when I was 16 years old. Though my parents are wealthy, I didn't need to rob any bank for money. Banks were our operations target." "Rich family? That young? Why then did you steal? And from banks?" A shocked expression written on Ubong's face as he asked. Mustapha replying him said, "I wanted to explore my tech skills. One of my uncles found out I was so good at tech. My dad would usually brag on my awards. So one day, my uncle asked me if I could infiltrate a building for him. That it was one of his business partners that he wanted to see if they were truthful with his investments. Just for fun," my uncle said. "Nothing much. I could easily have gotten some professionals to do it. I just want to see what my little nephew could do." As he said, he roughs my hair with his hand, smiling. I was so eager to jump at it. "Leave it for me, Uncle Jamal. Just give me the blueprint. I will find my way around it." I had replied him, too excited to stop, when I found out he kept coming back with more business investment sites he needed to check out. When I had found out during the news one evening when I was lounging in our living room with my dad, I noticed that the business sites Uncle Jamal usually brings to me to run on were banks stolen from days after I had given him the access to the backlog of the cameras in and around the buildings. "Uncle Jamal, are you stealing from those banks?" I had confronted him one evening when he came to me for another business site to run on. "Mustapha, my boy, you are so smart," he said. "Yes, I am robbing the banks. See, the government isn't trying. They leave most of the nation's graduates out there in the streets. Who will cater for them? Someone has to." He tried selling me on patriotic actions towards helping the youths of the nation, as the operation gangs are mostly youths. "I am giving them a better source of livelihood," he said. But I knew Uncle Jamal was just a greedy fellow. I officially joined them a year later when I needed to play around tech adventures. The thrill of carving out new softwares to break into security systems were my take home, even though Uncle Jamal gave me 10% of every operation. "Whoa, this is a lot," Ubong said. This wasn't what he was expecting from a petite figure as Mustapha. "I guess that's how life comes," Ubong said to himself as he showers in the bathroom, getting ready for the day. He looked at Mustapha differently now, no longer as the little boy he could help, but His thoughts were interrupted as he sighted Kenny and his friends heading towards them. Slowly, he said to Mustapha, lowering his voice, "Stay focused on cutting the grass. No matter what they say, totally ignore them." "Hey, small boy," Kenny said, referring to Mustapha. "When are you coming to pay homage?" he asked. Mustapha, totally ignoring him, kept cutting the grass just as Ubong advised. Kenny, feeling slighted by the rude silence, spoke up again. "You will hear from me, small boy. Ask your idiot friend here. He will tell you properly about me." Fear gripped Ubong. Oh my! Kenny is like a god in these walls. The beatdown that got my sentence to 5 years was because of him, Ubong fearfully said to Mustapha, physically shaking. Mustapha wasn't scared, he was rather in a thoughtful mood. Days went on as usual, but Ubong felt jumpy over every little noise that felt out of place. "You have to see Kenny," he would always say to Mustapha. Ubong almost peed in his pants when he saw Kenny in the midst of two prison guards walking towards them. Ubong was shaking. The encounter with Kenny at the yard gave him nostalgic feeling. He couldn't wipe off the memory of gaining 5 more years in this hole instead of walking home. An audible sigh of relief escaped from Ubong's mouth as the guards working with Kelly walked past them. It was then Ubong saw the scared look on Kelly's face and the cuffs in his hands. A tiny smirk pasted on Mustapha's face as the guards walked past them. Ubong could swear he saw Mustapha winked at Kenny. What had just happened? A rather surprised and curious Ubong jumped with questions at Mustapha as they were settled in their bunks. "What happened?" Mustapha asked, feigning innocence. "Don't you pretend to me, Mustapha. What happened? I saw you smirk at Kenny. I could swear you even winked at him. Did you know anything about this?" he asked. Yes. He wanted homage, so I paid him one," Mustapha replied. During a visit from my uncle, I asked him to run a background check on Kenny, as I was his target here. My uncle did and found out there was an assassination crime that Kenny was not judged for in Kwara State because he left the state years before the crime was uncovered. With a little tip here and there, Kenny is going to Kwara State to be tried for his crime. Ubong shocked but felt relieved knowing Kenny was out of their hair for good. He should go serve the penalty for his crimes. The members of Kenny's gang felt like a sheep without a shepherd. Within that week, some persons were already claiming to be the new prison head. All the fights and politics were none of Ubong and Mustapha's problem. An excited incident happened that brought a new glimmer of hope to Ubong's heart. A guard came to tell him he had a visitor. Shocked and surprised, who might that be? In his 4 years of being in prison, he hasn't received any visitor. He rushed up to the gate. As it opened before him, he almost wanted to collapse. Am I dreaming? His hands shaky over his eyes. Eno, Itoro, and Udeme, what are you guys doing here? Ubong was shocked to see his siblings after such a long time. He wished there was no barrier between them. He had missed them so greatly. A tight hug with them would have made a huge difference, but he was elated for just seeing them. How are you guys doing? Ma Basio, thank you for today. The siblings were jumping and also gnawing at the barrier between them. They want to hold and touch their big brother. Missy Ufong with them told them to try and be quiet so they can have more time with Ubong. Brother, we miss you. The eldest amongst them spoke, tears streaming down their face. Ubong learned that after his arrest, things were so difficult in the house that the kids had to go to the street begging for food to eat. As their parents were engrossed in their own charade, the kids needed to eat. It was on the street Mr. Ufong saw them and catered to them, hence getting a legal permit to be their guardian. Maybe that's why God hasn't given me my own family yet, she would say, to always take care of another family already here on earth. Today feels like a birthday that I haven't celebrated in years combined. Elated Ubong shared his emotions to Mustapha as he laid on his bunk to reminisce over the day's joy. Mustapha was happy to share in his joy. I can see how happy you are. It was a thank you gift for informing me ahead of Kenny. What? Ubong couldn't believe his ears. He almost jumped at Mustapha right there on his bunk. You did this? I owe you majorly, bro. Thank you so much, he tearfully said to Mustapha, appreciating him wholeheartedly. See, come, I have an idea, Ubong motioned to Mustapha one day at the cafeteria. You are so good at tech, so imagine this. Imagine a camera device that could see through a building within a given space. You don't have to install so many cameras at different locations of a building to actually get a view of what is happening. Just one of these devices, okay. Position it at a distant location in a building. It captures everything within that range. Infrared kind of images, right? Mustapha getting a glimpse of what Ubong was trying to say. Yes, something like that, where you can view everything within that space on your device from one camera. Wow, Ubong, that is so brilliant, Mustapha said, applauding him on such an exceptional discovery. Mustapha continued, let's put our heads together to make it work. We would have to get the patent right before launching out. I know my dad will fully be in support. He will get me a lawyer. But I wanted to give you the 10% of my shares with Uncle Jamal to start your life with when you're out. But with this now, you can get a good lawyer for the patent signing with me. One of the things I learned from my dad is always sign up deals legally. Mustapha, how can I thank you? Thank you so much, bro. Thank you so much. A grateful Ubong expresses his wholesome gratitude to Mustapha. You looked out for me when you knew nothing about me, Mustapha said. That was more I could ask for. That was Mustapha's last day in the cell. His dad had pulled some strings. Ubong felt his life had been torn apart. When he thought life was taking shape, it comes crashing again. I will not forget you, bro, Mustapha said to him. But Ubong's aching heart couldn't resonate with the words coming out of Mustapha's mouth as he bade him farewell. Life became gloomy again for Ubong. Counting down to 1 year in prison felt like 10 years. His blink look returned as he focused on his monotonous tasks and survival skills again. He had missed Mustapha, but depressed over his brilliant idea that he had already told Mustapha. I felt that was a life-changing idea, and I entrusted it into another person's hand. He felt bittered with himself. The excited days are when Mr. Ufong comes visiting with his siblings. Those days are the happy days that Ubong looks up to. Ubong stepped outside the walls of the prison. He felt like an alien in the streets of Uyo. Everything seemed different. The air, the buildings, even the birds chirped differently. Life outside the enclosing four walls of prison was peaceful, even in its chaotic state. Thank you for watching and supporting us. See you on the next tale. Keep loving yourself. Bye for now.